Hello again. So thank you very much for watching the webinar. I really enjoyed filling you in on my journey. I didn't realise how quickly the time was going to go, but I could see that there were Q&As popping up in the chat boxes and lots of really interesting questions came in. Actually, some really great questions that I thought were quite interesting. And when I looked at those questions afterwards, I realised we'd run out of time, but I wanted to take the opportunity to cover some of those questions that had come in. I hope that I've covered all of them, but if I've missed anything or you desperately want an answer, please send me a message either through LinkedIn or email, or connect to me in whichever way so that I can get back to you with an answer. I think there were some really great questions, really challenging people's thinking, and we definitely want to see more deaf leaders in leadership roles. So the first question I thought was really great, and it spoke about situations where perhaps you might see in the workplace a deaf person who's keen to be promoted and then is disappointed when hearing people are promoted around them and they're not being given those promotions themselves. So for me, that was a really interesting question. I thought about it quite a lot. I think the most important thing is that when you're looking for a promotion, you have to be really deserving of that promotion. You have to be showing that you're really good at your job. These opportunities aren't going to land on your doorstep without you being able to prove yourself first. So that's the same regardless of whether you're hearing or deaf. For me as well, a really good relationship with your manager is really important. So having that relationship through your PDP, your personal development plan, having those open and honest conversations about feeling like there's a glass ceiling that you're reaching. If your manager says you're not ready for the promotion, then ask questions about why you're not ready and build a plan that gives you the skills that perhaps you're missing or the experience that you haven't yet had exposure to, so that perhaps over the next 6 or 12 months you take those opportunities on board for the next opportunity. Your manager might also have insight into other opportunities across the organisation you work in, or other key people who you should get in contact with. And really, the more people who know about you and your career, the more people's minds your names will be sitting in, so that when those conversations are coming up about opportunities, your names will be dropped into those conversations and people will know who you are, making a promotion more likely. If you're still facing barriers, it might be worth considering whether the organisation is the right place for you. It might be that it's not the right place for you to take that next step and you need to think about an alternative organisation. I wouldn't want to work somewhere where I wasn't able to be promoted, so perhaps there is another place that would be better for you. The second question spoke about how we provide opportunities for deaf people who we know are really skilled and really experienced, but don't have the formal qualifications like a degree, for example, to support that experience and skill level that they have. I think it's important to remember that different industries view that in different ways. So, for example, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, there are mandatory qualifications that regulations require you to have, and there's no way around not having the appropriate qualifications. However, there are many, many jobs where you don't need a degree and you can head straight into that job and work your way up through gaining experience within a role. And I think there's a number of examples of roles that are more like that. So I have a friend who is an expert aircraft designer, hugely skilled at their job. They didn't have a university degree, so started in a workplace and really worked their way up to a very senior level through exhibiting their skills and experience. And I know of a number of examples like that. So for me, if you're in a job and you're doing really well and you're having those conversations with your manager about your progress, there's some companies that are keen to support people's development. So whether that's enabling you to access a qualification, some companies can arrange support either internally or with an external provider of a course that you might need to attend or a qualification you might need to gain. So I often look at LinkedIn, where there's some learning on LinkedIn and some recordings, and I spend some of my spare time looking at those training courses or those opportunities that LinkedIn provide. So for example, it might be about how to do a good presentation, and I might watch that video and then use it in work and practice those skills that I've learned. So not just taking the theory, but then using them in a real life example. The third question links in actually with those first two, and it speaks about how hearing organisations or mainstream organisations can be encouraged to improve the situation for deaf people. So I've been working in hearing organisations across the last 20 years, and my absolute number one piece of advice is to do anything you can to improve the deaf awareness of the organisation. That is so crucial for me. So I really want to change people's mindsets to recognise the social model of people with disabilities. So often they think, well, deaf people is all about your ears, it's all about that medical side of being deaf. And for me, it's really important that that side is set to that kind of perspective is set to one side. And we're talking about the reason that there are barriers for deaf people is because hearing people don't understand how to work with deaf people, and that society creates the barrier and not the deafness itself. I mean, that's firmly my view. I'm really keen that hearing organisations are encouraged to develop that view as well. So for me, bringing in a deaf awareness trainer is really important. And in fact, whenever I have started a new job, or whether I've promoted or been promoted or moved to a new team, or perhaps people have left and there's lots of new people on board, I bring in a deaf awareness trainer external to the organisation. I have a handful of contacts who are really great at doing that deaf awareness training. And my hearing counterparts tend to attend that course and be really enlightened. I see a significant shift in their attitudes towards deafness, and that deaf awareness for me is really important. So having a trainer who's full of humour, who can build that relationship with the hearing counterparts, so they're not attending a course they feel really stiff and uncomfortable, really breaks the ice on that topic of deaf awareness and enables it to continue throughout my time in a workplace. So for me, deaf awareness is really, really important. There were a number of other questions actually that came up on the Q&A. One of them asked me whether I had my own PA for booking meetings and organising things in my workplace. So in the webinar, I think I spoke about how I was working really hard and having to book my own interpreters early on in my career. That's definitely something that I experienced. In a previous job, I had a shared access to a PA. They weren't my PA, but they were somebody who helped me with rescheduling meetings and things like that. And then at The Economist, when I was more senior, I did have my own PA, and undeniably that was a useful resource to have access to. There might be hearing people could book meetings all day back to back, and I had to ensure that I had free time for interpreters to have breaks, and having that PA who enabled me to schedule those meetings in appropriately was really helpful. In my workplace now, I don't have a PA again, but I think that I've almost worked out different ways around the issues. So for booking interpreters, I don't contact a load of different interpreters and try to book them. I know that I have meetings every day. So I book my interpreters for a period of time in advance using a system called BSL Beam, which is a web-based system, which is a wonderful tool. So I put all of the dates in that I need interpreters, and then I send it out to the interpreters and see who offers to fulfill each of those dates. So the interpreters almost book themselves into the dates when they're available. So it takes me just one day and I'm able to book my interpreters for the coming period of time. And that system really takes a lot of what is otherwise quite onerous in terms of the paperwork off of my shoulders. It also automates the paperwork that's required for access to work interpreters. So I started to use that probably about 2 years ago. I received a question about PDPs. Now, a PDP is a personal development plan. Sorry, my throat got a bit dry there. I am a huge fan of a PDP. So for me, a PDP helps you think about it's almost a map, and that's the way your ship is being steered towards the destination that you're aiming towards. And for me, that's really helpful. And I imagine it probably is, especially for deaf people. So you're not necessarily taking exactly the same course as your hearing counterparts. And for me, the PDP enables me to build a plan for the journey that I want to take. Open conversations about that plan for me are also really important. And then I don't just rely on the PDP. I think there's a number of different areas. So perhaps if I identify an area where I'm a bit weaker and I need some support. So, for example, if I'm not sure how to influence people and I identify that as an area for weakness, I've been in contact with coaches before, so independent from the organisation that I've worked in, coaches that can give me tips and tactics, enable me to look at the way that I do things and develop a number of different tactics that I can use to develop that weaker area that I have. And also aiming towards, moving up in my career and following that map of the journey that I want to take. But for me, it's important to have open conversations all the time and be really pushing yourself perhaps beyond the boundaries where you're comfortable and not be frightened to move outside of your comfort zone. So for me, a PDP helps with that. You can review over the last 6 months or the last year. Every quarter I have a conversation with my manager. We talk about the last 3 months. We talk about what's coming next. And I do exactly the same with the team that I manage. So a PDP is widely used within the organisation that I work in, and I think it's very useful. Somebody asked an interesting question about my leadership style. So what my leadership style was, how I manage people. And there are a number of different leadership styles. So some people like to be they like to create a group of followers. Some people are a bit quieter, they manage more quietly, they like to steer their sheep from behind. And I think that there's often a combination of elements that build up your leadership style. My leadership style has definitely evolved. I've worked in different areas, I've worked at different levels of seniority, and it has definitely been evolving and adapting over the years. And for me, I don't think there's a fixed name for my leadership style. For me, I think it's really important for me that my team are hungry and ambitious and they have that passion. And I think that has developed my leadership style. I'm keen to show my team that this is the way I am, that I have high expectations of the teams who work for me. I want to set standards really high. I want people to be high performers within my team. I like to take action. I don't like to talk about things and hypothesize for ages. I like to have an agreement and then take action upon it to keep things moving. I have a real bias for action. I think that often as deaf people, sometimes things are spoken about at length, and actually keeping things simple and succinct are really important to me. So receiving a really long email that really just talks about 3 things is really onerous when actually somebody could just say those 3 things. So my style tends to be succinct and simple and clear. What's also really important for me is achieving results. So you can't be a leader and just let your team flounder along. You really have to be aiming towards that common goal and getting results, and then building confidence that you achieve that towards leading into the next set of results that you're aiming towards. So whether it's, making sure a project runs smoothly or achieving a certain amount of revenue, for me, results are really important as a leader. Somebody spoke about how hearing people viewed me as a leader. So not as a deaf leader, but as a leader, the same as anybody else. And that's quite interesting. I mean, I have a team. There are 500 people who work within my division. They work in different areas. They have different sorts of responsibilities. And they just don't have time to see me as a deaf person, if I'm honest. So I meet with them, I talk to them about work, we share ideas, we talk about project priorities, and they have to be able to attend that meeting with a leader and not a deaf leader. So they just have to treat me as normal. They don't take the time to think about whether they're talking to a deaf person. They almost have to set that to one side themselves. I think what's quite interesting is I have two interpreters who I use often, and I've used them remotely for a number of years, and one's male and one's female. And often people who are hearing those voices, even though they're changing from a male to female voice, it just seems to work smoothly. I think that the hearing people are very much recognising that that is Toby speaking and not my interpreters, and what they're hearing is Toby, it's my voice and not the interpreters' voices. I think it shows that they trust me, that they believe in me. They don't think that I'm a deaf executive member. They don't treat me any differently. I think for us in our organisation, it's just about getting on with things. And I think that my style of leadership is very much about that as well. There was another interesting question about how I maintain a work-life balance. I know in the webinar I spoke at length about lots of the experiences that I'd had and how busy I had been. So in terms of managing that work-life balance, I mean, 20 years ago, at the beginning of my career, I didn't have any work-life balance. I worked. That was what I did. I mean, I had a real passion, but I worked a lot. I worked all the time, much too much. I was hugely competitive. I wanted to be the best I could be, and I wanted to be really successful. Later on, as I became a bit older, I got married. I have a young family. I've got twins at home. It definitely became more difficult to maintain that level of work. Obviously, you know, I had responsibility at work, and then I was also a volunteer on the board for the Royal Association for Deaf People and became a chair of that board. So I had a number of different areas which placed burdens upon my shoulders. And, you know, as you work up in your career, that responsibility definitely heightens. I also had really tough managers at some point who had really high demands upon me, which I had to try to manage as well. However, I've also worked with a number of really good managers who were tough, but also spent the time to sit down with me and really talk about what was involved at work. So I remember a really good conversation with a manager when we were talking about how much work everybody had. They suggested to me that you don't fill yourself up with 100% of your hours at working, because then other things come up and you end up working 120 or 150% of your time. So he said in 1 week, I should aim to fill up 80% of my time with what I'm planning to do for the week. So that's, I guess, 4 days out of 5. And that leaves the 5th day to be thinking about things. It could be that on that day you're able to pick up your children or you're able to go for a walk, and leaving that period of time free gives you that free thinking space and also really enables you to be the very best you can. It's a piece of advice that's really stuck in my mind and really changed the way that I approached work and made sure I could achieve efficiencies to work for those 4 days and then do thinking and, you know, those other elements in that 5th day, and also enabled me to maintain that work-life balance. And so I didn't feel like a hamster in a wheel. It also gave me more energy. I woke up in the morning and I was excited to go to work, excited about what I could achieve in my working week. So definitely finding ways to achieve balance for yourself is really important. I had a question where somebody was asking how important I thought it was for you to be interested in the area of work that you're in order to become a leader. And so for me, could I work in an area that I wasn't particularly interested in and work my way up and become a leader? I thought it was an interesting question. And for me, it would be impossible without having my heart and soul and passion in something. I just don't think I could have become so successful. So I spoke about at the start of my career where I worked across a number of different areas. So I worked in IT for a bit, and I moved to marketing, and I moved to sales, and I found finance, and that was my thing. And I was really lucky, it has been ever since. I mean, I love finance, but for me, I'm more interested in working in a business, making changes, being a challenging driver within a business. And that's my passion. It's that gives me the energy and the passion to lead, facing those challenges and problems every day, and working my way around them is really my area of passion. I think it's really important to have a purpose. So passion and interest is important, but so is a purpose. That reason that you wake up in the morning, where you're aiming towards, what you want to achieve. Because, you work 7 hours of every day, 5 days a week. So most of your life is spent at work. And if you're working somewhere where you're not passionate and you don't have a purpose, that is just, it's a bit boring. It's quite difficult to maintain. So having that passion really drives you forward. Having that fire in my belly certainly helps me in being a leadership and leading an organisation. And then I had one more question, which I noticed pop up on the chat in Q&A, and it asked me about how I manage my interpreters and working with a number of different interpreters over the year. I think it mentioned using a pool of interpreters. So for me, it's difficult to use interpreters who I don't know. Having regular interpreters who understand the jargon, they understand the way I communicate is really important. I mean, I have used interpreters now for many years. So I use a pool of maybe 5 or 6 interpreters who work with me on different days, and they understand my work really well. They understand the right tone. They know how to communicate with the people I work with. And I encourage those interpreters to share information among themselves, and I share information with them, because the more they understand about my workplace, the better for me. I always send them work documentation before meetings. It helps them prepare. It gives them an insight into what they're expecting. They also have access to my diary, so they know what meetings are taking place the next day, which of those meetings are important to me. And it really helps work just run much more smoothly. It smoothens out that voiceover, and the interpreters really understand what's happening in my workplace. Working remotely has worked brilliant for me. And I think probably for lots of other people, it really widens that pool of interpreters who you have access to. So regardless of if those interpreters work in Scotland or Ireland or very near you, it really doesn't matter anymore. It provides you with much more flexibility. You might have an interpreter who you have a great relationship with, and then they move somewhere else. And with remote working, you'll be able to continue to use them. So for me, that relationship with interpreters is incredibly important. So I hope I've answered all of the questions, but like I said at the start, if there's any questions that you're still thinking about or that I haven't answered, please get in touch with me. I mean, I'm hugely passionate about increasing the number of deaf leaders. The UK Deaf Leadership Summit has been amazing. I know there's been a couple of sessions so far, and there's some more scheduled into the programme as well. But having more deaf people who are raising their hands to do a presentation to support the rest of the deaf community and really see them be successful on their journey to leadership is great. Really rolling that out in the new generation of deaf leaders is brilliant. Thanks very much.